So we were just in executive session. We're reconvening now in open session. And do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I motion that we approve the consent agenda as offered.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll?
That's
Oh,
right.
do we have any discussion? I shouldn't need to ask. Any discussion on that?
No.
Okay, Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll?
Mr. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Himes,
Yes.
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
So that brings us to our data series part 2. And this is a deep dive into the state report card. And I believe Allison is going to present to us.
That is correct.
And Ms. Kirby, do you have anything to add before Allison starts?
No, I want to thank Allison in advance for preparing this. I made the wise decision of timing this work session with also her data briefing, her department briefing, because we're in the briefing season for departments, and so Allison Bird was able to do both of those.
Primed and ready to present, ask
Well,
me anything.
Would that be two birds with one presentation?
All right, well, thank you for having me this evening. Closer to the end of the presentation, I am going to be joined by 2 of my colleagues who are part of the educational services team. But just as a reminder before we get started, this is the second in a series of 4 data sessions that I and my teammates from Ed Services will be presenting. And this one, as indicated, is a deeper dive into state performance measures. And specifically, I'm going to provide a description of each of the 6 components and provide a multi-year trend data if available. And then again, Mrs. Gould and Mr. Swaggart are going to speak about district actions. So now that we have this understanding of the data, what are we doing with it?
And Allison, I just wanted to make a comment that Jim is very sorry he could not be here. He's out of town.
Yeah.
But he will want this presentation, and he wanted me to just let you know that he really appreciates what you do. He was
Thank
very
you.
upset to be missing this session.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And there were a couple of questions that he asked, so I do have the notes here. I will save those until he is present, so he can be a part of the conversation. I mean, certain things I'll
Okay.
have incorporated, but there was one thing in particular that he asked me to refer to, so I'll save that for a later.
Okay, or you can tell us now, and we can make him ask again.
He should take you out for coffee to get his version.
There's an idea. Just a reminder of one of the things that we work on anytime that we're describing performance is to ask 3 questions to help put our results into context. How do we perform compared to the goal? Again, that's like what's an A, what's proficient, what's good. How do we perform compared to others? And then for this presentation, we are going to look at performance of school districts across the state on each of the components, and then performance of the first ring school districts. And then the third question is, how do we perform compared to ourselves over time? And again, that's where we bring in our trend data. So the first ring school districts, there are 16, and these represent the districts that are just outside of the city of Cleveland border. Those that are colored in orange or yellow are districts on the east side of Cleveland, and those that are in white are on the west side. So there are other references to the districts, so you don't have to memorize them, that they'll come up. Again, the state of Ohio measures performance of schools and districts across 6 different components in 10 graded measures. And then starting last year with the 2018 report card, they also added in an overall grade for schools and districts. The calculation for that overall grade is based on the weights indicated for each of the 6 components. And when you have a school or a district that does not have results for one of the components, like for example, our elementary schools don't have graduation rate or prepared for success, so the weighting is redistributed. So the achievement component. The achievement component looks at performance on the test itself, and it includes 2 different measures. So one measure is indicators met, and that looks at, in its most simple form, right, what percentage of your students passed the test. So who scored proficient or higher on the test. And then you have the performance index measure, which looks specifically at school performance, or excuse me, at the performance level on each test. So there are 5 levels on each one of the tests, limited being the lowest. Then you have basic, proficient, accelerated, and advanced. So with performance index, it actually gives points based on that performance level, and that's how the indicator is measured. So when we take a look at our performance compared to others, on the left-hand side, you have performance of the districts across the state. And then on the right-hand side, we have the performance of the first-ring districts, and you can see some similarities in terms of distribution of grades between the state and the first ring. And then here's the breakdown. So where the 16 school districts in the first ring actually landed in terms of their achievement component grade.
So am I reading this correct? That if you go back to your last slide, yeah, that one, with the bars.
Okay.
So for the state achievement, am I reading this correctly, that 15% of Ohio's school districts score proficient or above?
So what that tells you is that 15% of the school districts in the state of Ohio earned a score of A or B, meaning that, so the two measures are weighted. So performance index has a weight of 75%, and indicators met has a weighting of 25%. So it would be fair to say that for those districts who scored an A or AB, that a majority of their tests were proficient or higher. Yes, you would have to do that to have a score of A or B. And again, when we look at the two components, indicators met makes up 25% of the overall component. And in order to meet an indicator, 80% of your students have to have a proficient score or higher.
And so you can see, just to go back, hardly anyone's hitting that in first ring, and that's a huge struggle statewide too. I mean, that kind of jumps out.
Right, and again, it's not to make an excuse for our performance, but when you look at it, it's a very challenging measure to meet because of the bar being set so high. Now, that's not to say again that we can't meet it, but we're not the only ones that are struggling in this particular area.
So it means more than 2/3 of the state are getting an F in this.
Yes. Yes.
Repeat what the relative weights of indicators met and performance index are
Indicators met represents 25%.
of the total achievement number,
Yes.
and performance index then is the remaining 75%.
Yes.
Okay.
And then here you have a snapshot of the district's performance in English language arts on the English language arts test from 2014-15 through 2018-19. So there is a handout by your nameplate so that you can look at it a little bit more closely. So the first page is, or the first 2 pages are the district performance, first one in English language arts, the second one in mathematics, and then you have the breakdown of performance for each one of the buildings in their respective tested areas. So when you look at what I would call a considerable drop in performance from that 2014-15 to the 2015-16 school year, I think it's important to note that in 14-15, that was the first, well, the one and only year that we used the PARC consortium for our testing in mathematics and English language arts. It's also the last year that the Ohio graduation test was included in the calculation. So after 14-15, the state began to phase that out. It was reported but no longer included in the report card calculation. And so we switched to our high school students being measured based on end-of-course exams. We went from a more general test of standards up through grade 10 to very specific standards related to courses. And just the screenshot of the mathematics. And just to be consistent, here we have the breakdown of performance on the performance index. So here, the district earned a grade of D. You see the state performance and or distribution on the left-hand side and first-ranked districts on the right-hand side. Here is 5-year trend. So each of the performance levels are indicated by a specific color. So the orange at the bottom represents the percentage of students scoring at the limited level. Yellow would be basic. The light green is proficient. The darker green is accelerated. And the blue is advanced. So again, you see that switch in tests from 2014-15 to 2015-16. We saw an increase in the percentage of students performing in the limited and basic level. But then, since then, we see a drop and then
Surprising consistency.
a maintaining of performance.
It's amazing what happens when you keep the same test for more than 2 years in a row, right?
And now that we've had a chance to adjust to it, teachers have adjusted their instruction to meet the revised Ohio standards. We are better prepared to help students attack or address technology-enhanced items. So when you think of, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, I shared the grade 4 mathematics question, which is definitely a shift from when I was in school, and performance was measured by the Ohio proficiency test, or the OPT, where not only are there multiple ways to approach the questions, but there are multiple correct answers, right? So this constructed response is just a different way of instructing, a different way, a different expectation for how students show what it is that they know. But again, my colleagues will speak more to that later on in the presentation.
One thing that I asked Allison in trying to understand the impact of students that are at limited, basic, versus students that are at proficient, advanced?
Yes. So the point values, so what this measure does is it takes the percentage of students at each one of the levels and it multiplies it by a particular value to determine the weighted points. And you get considerably fewer points. For example, a student that scores, or the percentage of students that score at limited earn the district 3/10 of a point. If you score in the basic range, then that's 6/10 of a point. Proficient, you earn 1 full point. Accelerated, 1.1, and then advanced, 1.2. Right, so it takes more students.
1.2 versus 0.3.
Correct.
That's an interesting distribution.
Yes.
Okay,
And
never
so,
mind.
right? So
I'm
the-
just remembering some statistics class from many years ago.
So the more that we know, the more that we understand, right? You have
Yeah.
to have more students performing at the accelerated, advanced, and proficient level to I want to say to make
offset.
up for, but to offset, right, the percentage of students who are performing at that limited and basic students.
Wow.
Now, one of the pros, if I can describe it that way, of this particular component is that what it does do is it looks at our ability to move students from one level to the next, which the indicator measure does not allow us to do. It's either proficient or not. So this one, at least, we can begin to see if we are improving performance over time. And, I hate to use this term, but I am, because I can't think of a better way to describe it. We get credit, or there's an acknowledgement, again, when we move students who are struggling up to the next level.
So we've had the same test since 16, 17.
Correct.
And we've had, most curriculum has been in place for most of that time, aligned to so the curriculum is aligned to the same standards that the tests are aligned to. And we continue to bolster our professional development, and we're training up. But we're not moving.
Yet.
I mean, we're not. And so we need to say these things out loud. Now, so first of all, I will express a real level of concern about the fact that we're not improving. At the same time, the other piece of me says, what we know very, very clearly is that what these tests really measure is the socioeconomic status of the homes that they are coming to us from. And it is not a straight line, but it's pretty darn close to a straight line. And so I'm drawn to say, okay, I really think that the inner ring discussion, how are we performing within that sort of peer group, is a really important discussion. But I'm also interested in the outliers, the districts around the state who have student bodies similar to ours, who are doing better, significantly better, who are scoring significantly better. And I'm really not interested in an individual school so much, because I'm always a little bit wary of what's going on there, because there have been cases where things that you're not proud of end up coming out years down the road from some of those schools that have miraculous performances. But I do hope that we can look around and find districts with similar makeup of students as ours who are doing better. And I know you well enough to know that you're looking for that already. But I'm very interested in hearing about if there are any of those districts with multiple schools that are doing better. And as I've said before, I still think that we really do need to evaluate our curriculum, the adoptions that we did. We did enough that it would not be unusual to hear that not everything that all the curriculum that we adopted is working. We adopted enough new curriculum that the law of large numbers will kick in. So
I appreciate your confidence in myself and the team, because yes, we are looking at similar districts who are showing considerable improvement. And there is a component, it's actually our value-added component that we will take a few minutes to dive deeper into, that actually does show our growth or our progression over the last 3 years. So,
Okay.
I'll show you. We'll get to that.
I look forward to it.
The next component is the gap closing component. So there are 4 measures that are included. We look at performance around English language arts, mathematics, the graduation rate, and the level of proficiency of our English learners. It is important to note that this particular component comes out of the Federal Education Act and the Federal Accountability System. And it looks at our performance on the state test as measured by performance index points. So again, almost identical to what we see in terms of the weighting based on performance levels for the achievement component, in particular, the performance index. For those of us who have been around for a while, we remember No Child Left Behind and adequate yearly progress. Well, same thing, different name. So now we have gap closing, which looks at annual measurable objectives, or AMOs, with the goal for all students to earn 100 performance index points, or back to your point, Dan, about like performance and what does it mean to earn an A or B. So all students being at least proficient on the tests.
And for the folks watching at home, can you give a quick explanation of which gap we're talking about? Because gaps are discussed all the time, and that's not necessarily intuitive to this.
Yes, I will. I'll also point out that within the presentation, there is a link to the technical documentation that shows the target or that improvement over time, where all students, you can see it here, are expected to earn that 100 points by the 2025-2026 school year.
So the bar is raised every year. Year over year, the target they need to hit is harder to get to.
It is, and they describe it in terms of there are annual short-term targets and then the long-term target of 100 points, or all students being proficient or higher by 2026. Again, that steady increase as time goes on, students will become wiser and more prepared.
Okay. There's a radio host quote that comes to mind. All children are above average, which we know is not statistically possible.
So here we have the gap closing component, and then I will get to your point about the gap and what gap we are looking at. Looks at performance to student groups. Now, in the documentation on the Ohio Department of Education website and the federal documentation, you will see these student groups referred to as subgroups. But I do want to point out that we are working to shift the language. We believe that language matters. And when that prefix of sub has the connotation of beneath or under or less than. So we are working to change the context. And even Ms. Kirby referred to our students, those populations as our priority students. Is that the language? So you'll hear me refer to or work to refer to what the state calls subgroups as student groups, because that's what they are. So we look at the performance of all students, groups of students around race, those who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, and then our English learners. In September, which seems like so long ago, there was a question raised about having a better understanding of the N size, or the minimum number of students that needs to be included, or that a school or district has to have for that student group to be included in the component. So what you see at the bottom is the table of the number of students. Over the 2018-2019 school year, a school had to have at least 20 students overall for them to be included in the calculation. And then for 2019-2020, it will be reduced one more time to 15 students, and then we expect it to remain at 15. Now for...
And Allison, I'm sorry, I missed that. That was per building, per district, per 15,
For school.
for the
For
school
schools and
building.
districts, right? So in order for a student grouping to count, a school has to have a minimum of 15 students, and it's the same for the district. The district has to have a minimum of 15 students
Okay.
in that student group for it to count.
So if we only had one English language learner in the whole district, it wouldn't,
Oh.
that student's
Or-
scores wouldn't factor in separately from all students.
Correct,
Right.
Okay.
Or if you had 14.
Right.
correct.
So it doesn't matter if your district has 6,000 students, 100,000 students. It's not a percentage, it's a flat number.
It's a flat
So if you have a school district that, has a graduating class of 63, your chances of having 15 might be less.
Correct. And, same thing, different way of saying it, the more homogeneous your student population is, the
Yeah,
the
then-
less
Right.
likely you will have students represented across the groups. So, Dan, to answer your question, I think the visual helps. So what we see is on the left-hand side is our performance in English language arts, and then on the right-hand side, we see our performance in mathematics, 2 of the 4 measures. Each one of the colored bars represents one of our student groups, and the key is created or established by ODE. The red circle or the dot is the short-term target, all right, or the number of points that need to be earned in order for that student group to hit the indicator. So I think when we talk about achievement gap, sometimes we are looking at how students of color or students who are typically underrepresented or underperforming perform compared to the majority population or to white students, depending on whether you're talking about race or those students who are typically underrepresented or underperforming. Here, however, the target is not based on, we're not comparing or closing the gap between, again, students of color or white students, but we're comparing it to a specific target based on historical performance.
So it's how each of those groups of students performs compared to this rising bar, which is set by the state.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, and I don't mean to get too technical, so if I'm not clear, one of the challenges that districts face is that, let's say, we are a very homogeneous school district, and we actually have a neighboring district. The superintendent asked the question when I was in the room, and he asked, so if my population is predominantly African-American, and, like 99% African-American and 100% socioeconomically disadvantaged, does the target for all students from my district change, or is it adjusted based on my population? And the answer was no.
It does not adjust for your
It
population.
does not adjust for your population. The all students measure does not adjust for your population. Which it's just one of those things that makes the measure interesting, and we know it, we understand it, and we can, work to it. But
it goes even further, I think, and if my understanding is not correct, I'm begging you to correct it. So, for instance, well, let's just use the all students. So, all students,
Is
Yeah.
that the
Which is
purpley
the-
blue?
the purpley blue toward the middle for math, if we're on the math. So the target was 79.4%, and we came up short. Am I reading that correctly?
the number listed is actually our
Okay,
student performance. So I'm going to pull up the technical documentation again.
so, we came up short, but when we come up short, it is a district-wide report, but it's really student-specific. So we have students, individual students, who came up short, and those individual students make up our gap. And so we're looking, and this is where I want clarification, for our closing the gap is really based on those individual students scoring closer to the next year's goal than they did this year, or is it those students reaching next year's goal? That's how you close the gap.
So almost perfect. So you close the gap by either meeting the short-term target, so meeting the current year's value. So back to your example, like for mathematics, for all students, the target was 86.2 points, right? So we
Got
were
it.
short of that. So one way to meet the measure is to hit that short-term target. The other way is to improve your performance compared to the previous year. And when that performance is greater than 10% of the distance for the long-term goal, you get the maximum number of points, or 100 full points. If you don't improve by at least 10%, then what you just get partial points or partial credit for.
Wow.
Wish I had a chalkboard. It's easier with a whiteboard to give an example. Just to backtrack again.
So, Allison, real
Yes, ma'am.
quick, how are we measuring economic disadvantage when we don't have free and reduced lunch anymore? How are we identifying who's economically disadvantaged?
So based on our CEP status, or with the grant, we identify every student for testing purposes as being economically disadvantaged. So you'll see the values
So it's the same as all students?
for all students will
Which it
match
is.
that of economically disadvantaged,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
performance in the state, performance in the first ring, breakdown of first ring performance. In English language arts and mathematics, and then we can see graduation rate and then the proficiency of English learners. And then here it's also, bless you. I think it's, so this is one area while we can see just from the charting and the targets, there's of course still work to do, but the district did improve a letter grade. So we went from a D for 17-18 to a C on the 18-19 report card. Prepared for success. The prepared for success component looks at the graduating classes, and like the graduation rate, the students included in this component are a year to 2 years behind. So what I mean by that, we're going to look at results from the 2019 report card, but we're actually measuring the performance or talking about students from the class of 2018, they're in the 4-year cohort, and then the class of 2017 who are in the 5-year cohort.
And I just want to underscore this because in my learning and understanding, when I looked at how high schools were measured previously to where I was, it was not, the only thing that was delayed was graduation and college enrollment. So for there to be a delay in the reporting of the ACT or SAT that's a new way to think about it, and it kind of helped me understand from a strategic perspective, kind of the runway to improvement too as well. Same goes for the K-3 indicator, which also is delayed like graduation rate. It's not within the year.
So this is delayed by a year or 2 years?
So what you see is information not based, I think sometimes what people assume or what they think is that I'm looking at graduation rate on the 2019 report card, so that represents the current class, like the class that just left in June.
Right.
And it isn't, it's the one from a year
It's
behind.
2018.
Okay.
It's from 18.
And when you think about how unfair that is to the districts that are in takeover,
Right.
because, it just, there's all of this pressure, all of this effort, and yet that community is being punished, perhaps, for an entire year longer when their numbers should get them out.
Or two.
Yes.
Or two.
And this is purely Ohio. Again, this is Ohio. This is not being done, this way throughout the country. These numbers are available before they are released in Ohio. Like Ohio is, one of 11 states at this point, maybe 10, that are still testing beyond the federal minimum. So, this is something that we in Ohio have chosen, continue to choose to do to our public schools.
There's an interesting, to your point, I haven't read it yet, but the October edition of Phi Delta Kappan is about ESSA, so like the impact of the Federal Education Act, and when it was first revised, the idea was we were going to put more control in the hands of the local districts, and we would see these adjustments. And again, I haven't had a chance to really go through it, but there is a review of like the impact on states and then individual districts in that like top-down kind of piece. So what we thought was going to happen versus what we're actually experiencing is reviewed in the magazine. Oh, interesting.
I mean, just to your point, I have to say, in Illinois, this is so different than Illinois. It really blows my mind. It really does. From the measures, the targets, it's very old school NCLB, which all the research showed was not an effective tool to move student achievement. And it doesn't mean it's not important to assess where kids are and use that, to improve outcomes, but this is pretty draconian, what I've seen in Ohio now, now that I have a solid understanding of it.
Welcome home.
So when we think about prepared for success, again, it looks at percentage of students in the graduating cohort. So you earn points for this particular component. The maximum number of points a student can earn for the district, we think about it like that, is 1.3 points. Now, how does a student earn 1 point? Well, you have to hit one of the 3 indicators up top. So they earn remediation free score on the SAT or the ACT, or earn an honors diploma, and/or earn an industry-recognized credential. And then if they do that, then there's an opportunity to earn an additional 3/10 of a point by scoring 3 or higher on 1 or more AP tests, or earning 3 or more college credit or dual enrollment credits.
So this is an opportunity for one student to sort of have a larger weight on the district's overall score than just one?
Yes, minimal, yes. So a student can earn 1 point, or you can get a bonus of 1.3. I think one of the misconceptions is that, well, if I'm taking 5 AP courses, right, we just recognized our AP scholars, right? So we heard how kids had, all 5s on 5. I think one young man had up to like 7 tests that he had taken where he earned a 5. But that performance would only earn the district an additional 3/10 of a point, and that's provided, I would assume he could score a remediation-free score or has scored remediation-free score on the SAT or the ACT, but that only happens if, again, both conditions are met.
Whereas that same one student, if they tank on 2 of the high-stakes tests, their score shows up and hurts us on
Multiple times,
both
yeah.
of those measures.
Yeah.
So they're only counted once to our benefit, but on every test.
That is one way to think about it, yeah. So this is a graphic that comes directly from the Ohio Department of Education website. And again, it's just to help with understanding what that component looks like and how it's calculated. So on the left-hand side, you see a listing of reporting categories, reporting areas, like our participation rate in the SAT and the ACT, the percentage of students who earned an honors diploma. So some of those are actually included in the component, but not necessarily all of them. Over on the right-hand side is where you see, again, so out of the 821 students in the 2017 and 2018
So
cohort.
that's 2 graduating years.
Combined, yes,
Thank you.
it's 2017 and 2018 combined.
So next year it'll be 2018 and 2019?
Yes,
So there's 1 year overlap with,
because what is the current 4-year cohort will then become the 5-year cohort.
right, okay.
So
Yes.
performance then for our current students in the high school this year, we won't see until
2 years from
2
now.
years.
Yeah, 2021.
Okay.
But we will have a good idea of what those numbers will be,
We do.
because we can do math.
We can. Yes. So
Apparently the state can't.
there are 3 measures based on, or 3 components based on how the information is reported and when it's reported that we have preliminary results for in advance of the report card. And my team is very protective of the information, and they always remind me to say, the unofficial projected performance is, because it's
like election
never
night.
official until it's published by the
Early
department.
returns,
And we have had times where they've made changes, so I don't remember the school year, which year it was, but it was sometime in the last 5 years where the math scores that were initially reported were then changed, right? So it's not official until it comes out from ODE, and then again, ODE can change their mind and redo it. It's only happened once in my tenure in being here, but it has
terrible.
happened before. So it is important, like, yes, we will know K-3 literacy, prepared for success, and graduation rate in the fall of 2019 in advance of being reported on the 2020 report card.
One of the numbers here that surprises me is the 1.9 on industry-recognized credentials. And I think that is almost certain to be a big area of improvement. And I think that this is one of those times when the year lag is going to mean a lot.
Yes. Agreed. We'll see it there. We'll see it in SAT participation because, with the cohorts, we see the requirement for the school day SAT. Again, the work that we've done with equal opportunity schools and having more students participate in advanced placement
Yeah.
courses.
That's great.
There seems to be a major philosophical flaw with this. Because a student who goes through the standard sequence of courses and graduates high school having done, whatever it is, 4 years of English and 3 years of math and blah, 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 counts for bupkis here. We only get credit for a student who has gone above and beyond what is required for graduation, which is the honors diploma. And that somehow, again, back to basic statistics, if your norm is 1, why isn't the norm being counted? Right? The norm is a graduation diploma.
Help me understand, I'm missing what you're saying, Molly, because
We get points for students who earned an honors diploma, 192 of that 821 cohort.
So it could be an honors diploma, it could be a remediation-free score on
Right, but all of
ACT or
those
SAT.
are more than
Side of the minimum requirement.
what is required to graduate from high school in the state of Ohio.
That is correct.
So that cohort of 821 students is 821 students who actually graduated and got the lovely signed piece of paper. They did what they were supposed to do, right?
I don't think that's right.
Or is
That
that
is-
the cohort, so that
is the
includes those who
total
didn't?
Cohort, so right,
Okay.
we'll see that represents the denominator in our graduation rate,
Yeah.
not necessarily the numerator, which would be
Okay,
those
so
students
how
who
many of
completed
those
within that time.
821 did graduate? That's where I get,
For the 4-year cohort, I believe the number is 86.6, and then for the 5-year cohort of the 2018, it was 90.6.
this is a percentage.
Yes,
So 90% of 821,
close, right.
again, we're still only
7
getting
hours.
credit for 192 of those kids.
Right.
See what I mean? So
I
the
do.
vast majority of students, and again, in the state of Ohio, the vast majority of students are graduating high school with what the state says are the minimum graduation requirements. It comes back to a flaw in the way the whole thing is put together.
And I do want to say, one of the other misconceptions that comes up, in particular with, I gave the example about advanced placement and how the additional 0.3 of a point only occurs if you meet one of the 3 requirements. But I've also heard it discussed, or the thinking is, the value there is reflective of students who are enrolled in an advanced placement course, and it's not. So again, our denominator, when we see that AP exam score of a 3 or better, 13.3%, that is out of the entire, or the combination of the 2 cohorts, so out of the 821, not just those students who are actually enrolled in an advanced placement class.
So the percentage of AP students who get a 3 or better is a much higher
Is
percentage.
not identified in what you see
Right,
in that
right,
reporting
right.
side. yeah.
Okay.
Not to say we don't have work to do on that, because we have a lot of kids not getting 3s or better on the AP. That's a question about, are they being correctly guided? Is the AP course really the best fit for some of those kids? I think that is another thing that, and are they prepared for that? Are we scaffolding kids up, or are we asking them to climb?
I think, so,
steep.
one of the other points of consideration is, when we have that conversation, is that there is also research out there that says, just by enrolling in the course, just by having the experience and taking the test, you are more likely not only to enroll in college, but to complete college. So
Yes,
while
yes,
they
yes.
may not demonstrate the level of proficiency that we would want during their high school career, it does set them on a path for successful college completion.
One of our work sessions is going to be on AP, so we can go
that's great.
deeper into that work too. Because I think we raised a good discussion about causal factors. My question is, how do we prepare more kids to be ready for the course? Like, what are the precursors and opportunities? How do we continue to support teachers towards good success too as well? How do we, learn all of that stuff?
Support the kids in the courses. Yeah.
So again, we are not alone in our performance. This is something that districts struggle with or are working to improve across the state and in the first ring district. And again, there is our breakdown. Improving at-risk K-3 readers component, formerly known as K-3 literacy. is actually one of the more difficult components to explain. Like graduation rate and prepare for success, it is a component that we actually know the outcome much sooner than when the report card is printed. And that's because it is based on performance over 2 years. So what we see on the 2019 report card actually comes from reading diagnostic results from the fall of the 2017 and the fall of 2018. For students in grades 1, 2, and 3, they are tested using a reading diagnostic test. We use DIBELS by September 30th of each school year. And in kindergarten, those students need to be assessed by November 1st of each school year. And then I point that out too about the difference in the testing, because I know that we heard from our kindergarten teachers last year saying, that there's too much testing, there's too much pressure. For many of our kids, they are just, this is their first formal schooling experience, so we need more time to help teach them the routines and get them acclimated. So not only did we make adjustments in how we worked with our kindergarten teachers and our kindergarten students, but you see that reflected in the state as well. So how is the measure calculated? The measure is actually calculated using the information on the right-hand side of your screen. However, I included the charting. Again, this comes straight from the Ohio Department of Education website, so if you were to search for our report card, you'd be able to see this information. The piece that isn't included, and it's hard to describe or explain, is what percentage of our students are actually on track, because what the measure or the component itself does is it says, so of the students who aren't on track, how many of them are you able to move over the course of a school year? And what this shows me, or what this tells me, if you look at year 3 and year 4 over on the details of the measure side, that our area of focus or work, or where we see the least improvement, is in the year for students in the 2nd grade and in the 3rd grade within the year.
But that 14% or 14.1% who were moved from off track to on track is actually 14% of the 23 or of the 25? I gotta line my years up properly.
They are actually, so that 14% is going to be represented in the 74.7% from the 3rd.
3rd grade.
Actually, I'm sorry, that is not correct. So okay, let's start at the top. So
Sure.
year 1 represents kindergarten to 1st grade. So of the students that were not on track in kindergarten,
The 31.6% of kindergartners, we were able to move 2/3 of them back on track.
correct.
Okay, so then you stair step.
Right, so
now
year
you've got
2 represents
10%.
1st grade to 2nd grade, so we move 43% of them. Year 3 is from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. And then year 4, 3rd grade students are the only students that are also measured within a year. So for the other 3 years, it's from fall to fall, 2nd to 3rd, 1st to 2nd. The year 4 looks at how many students in the 3rd grade who are identified as not on track were proficient or higher on the 3rd grade state test in
Which
ELA.
is different than the doubles, so we're talking
Correct,
about a
which is
different
different than
test by the time we get to them.
Correct.
So, for me, it would be really helpful to have numbers attached to this, because I think we're down to a very small handful of kids by year 4. And,
14% of 25%.
right,
So, and it's why I probably made it harder for myself than I had to. When you look at the measure on the website, this is what you see when you're trying to figure out the details of the measure. They do simplify it when you look at, and this is a screenshot, so I can't link to the actual screen. You can see the overall numerator and denominator, so the number of students that we moved on track compared to the total number of students who were off track, but that within a specific grade level, they don't display. So I can provide that to you, or we can talk about it in one of the future sessions.
I mean,
Because I agree, it is easier to actually understand it when you can see that level. level.
Because, there's other considerations. So some of those, there's transients, so kids leave the district that are no longer on the measure.
Correct, so they're not included. You have to have
And-
2 data points in order to be
And then
included
I'd
in
also,
the measure.
point out that, we have kids with some, with some really significant learning disabilities that are no doubt involved there. And so, we're putting, I know that we do great work with those students, but I'd be really interested in knowing that, that year 3, year 4, there's more to these stories that
Absolutely.
I would benefit by knowing more about, because that'll help me understand how we might be more effective in targeting interventions and supports for these kids.
Absolutely, okay. And so, yes, so maybe that'll be a point of conversation for one of the 2 remaining work sessions, and just, partner with all of my curriculum and instruction and ed services team members, but in particular, yesterday, Karen Heinsbergen and I, and Karen is the program specialist for literacy, we worked with our English language arts leads, so some of our instructional support team members at the elementary level who assess the students and who work with the students and who provide some of the targeted interventions that are these kiddos who are identified as off-track need.
It would also be important to know, for instance, in kindergarten, we've only got not on track, on track. I'd like to track kids who are ahead. And how are those kids moving, are we moving kids who in kindergarten are above track, if you will, or above whatever the expectation is? Are we still helping those kids grow? Because that is not considered in this measure.
Right, you can't see that.
And yet, we as parents and educators need to make sure that we're moving those kids as well. And I'm confident that we are. I'd like to have data behind my confidence.
Yeah, because to Dan's question, if you're a student that is on track in those grade levels, we don't start seeing a data point on you again until the OST in 3rd grade.
Correct. If you
And
are
is
on
it a
track, you
growth-
don't appear at all in this particular measure.
And we're not even looking at growth necessarily with them at 3rd grade, but it's just we're starting over again, and then we start to see the growth 4th grade moving forward.
Correct.
Can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
So, for students that have IEPs or 504s, do we tend to see, maybe this is a follow-up question to explore. My assumption is we probably don't see it a lot, and probably really shouldn't see a lot of students getting identified in the primary grades, because we want to make sure we're going through the full RTI, MTSS process and providing the supports and interventions to really kind of diagnose, right? It would just be interesting to see, what our trends in, though we do have some students that are, we know that. So it'd be interested to kind of see what those trends are at the primary level, since this indicator measures all students.
We can look into that.
Yeah.
So Allison, these, in the red graphs, the kids that remain off track in our district, okay, are we still looking at this from the state in our district?
No, this is solely our information. Now, we
Okay.
can see performance across the state here. Right, so where a majority of the grades for districts was in the C range, and that's where we perform. I think it's also a good time to note that while performance is not where we want it to be, right? We want all of those, with how the state defines struggling readers, to get on track. We did improve a letter grade in this particular component, so we did move from a D to a C in the K-3 measure.
Allison, why are some
But
not
they're not-
rated across the state?
So some are not rated because they don't have the minimum size, the minimum number of students in order to be included. So similar to gap closing, I don't remember what the number is.
Okay, so if your district is really
overall.
small,
If your district is
Or-
really small, or they are on track. If the reading diagnostic tool that they use for them identifies them as being on track, then
So if you don't have students coming into your district off track in these early grades, then this
this
measure only
component-
helps you.
it will not hurt you, correct? It only helps you. And we see for 10% of the districts, or what, just 60 districts in the state, their kids are coming in ready to go.
Yeah. But for us, that means more preschool.
Right, right.
Again, our breakdown for the first ring districts. And that takes us to the progress component. So progress component, also known as or referred to as the value added component.
Yes.
It has 4 measures. So similar in like theory or understanding to gap closing, they look at particular student groups. So we look at the performance of all students, students who are identified as gifted, students with disabilities, and the lowest 20% academically in the state. And in its simplest form, to understand the component, what does it look at? It looks at or answers the question, have students met the expected growth? So we look at, well, we don't do this calculation. The state contracts with an outside vendor to do the calculations. But they look at previous test performance and say, based on that test performance, where are you likely to perform? And then everybody takes the test, and then they compare kids' performance at that level to everyone else in the state and see how we compared. Breakdown of this state performance by district and then first ring performance across first ring districts. But this is actually what I would call a strong point for us. And you might go, how can you think that? Because we've earned an F in that particular component. Well, this is additional information that is not accessible on the Ohio Department of Education website, but I think it's important to show, because in the fine print of the technical documentation for the progress component, it says that the report card component can include up to 3 years of information. So what this chart actually shows us, you see the student groups along the left-hand side of the table, so overall gifted, lowest 20% in students with disabilities. And then you see our scoring with 3 years of data included, just 2 years of data included, or the current year's data included. So the score under the 3-year is what is represented on the report card. However, performance of just 2018-2019 is indicated under the current year. And so what you see is we are in fact progressing based on the performance or how our students have performed over
So
time.
next year, that oldest year's data rolls
Come
off,
out.
and in 2 years,
Correct.
okay.
So we can,
Assuming we maintain or continue improving,
so,
because again, it's the rolling average problem.
All right. Or this measure doesn't change.
Well, there is that one. There is that.
It doesn't change the
Unless,
measure.
yes, of course, because, yeah.
Because suddenly, districts that start to look
Starting
good
to
don't, are looking too good.
Quick.
So there is a link in the presentation that allows us to see the detailed version of this particular component. And again, what it allows us to do is see, so in the top, you just have the overall performance of all tests. But then as we scroll down, so it starts with the 3-year, but you can see performance in English Language Arts, ELA 1 and 2 would represent the high school courses, and then you have mathematics in each one of the grade levels, and then the end of course exams for Algebra 1 geometry, and then 5th grade and 8th grade science. So there's 2 ways that you can determine what's good or what's the target. Again, when we think about our questions to help us put this information into context, you can look at the color. So red or orange is not good. Yellow, light green, dark green, it means we're on the uptick, right? The darker the green, the better. So when you look at that 3-year composite, we see the more red than we would care to see. But then when we scroll down to 2 years, you see more yellow, more green. And
Now,
then-
these index numbers is this back to norm of 1? How, again, I'm just having a major problem wrapping my head around their use of statistics.
So we see the growth index used, it is a statistical measure that's used for other tests or assessments. But again, it looks at, it's like performance against the norm or what would be expected. So it's calculated by actually just dividing our growth measure by the,
Because they're showing a standard error, which varies all over the map.
and I'm drawing a blank right now because I can't think of what my denominator is, but I'll come back to it, Amalia. But we do see it, and we use that growth index in other areas. So another way that you can think about it, I don't know if this it won't help with the statistical side, but it will help with just a general understanding of what the number means. So when you have a value of 0, right, that means that the group of students met the expected growth. So they, based on their previous performance, they performed where we would assume or where we think they would typically
Not
perform.
above or below, 0.
Correct. And then anything between -1 and +1 would still be within expected range. Of course, the more
Right, if
positive,
the error is 0.5.
the better.
Yeah.
And again, then that goes with the color.
So,
So Allison, if this measure does not change, and we should expect to start seeing significant improvement in this area, based
So-
on the rolling average, the
So
third year
what you
rolling
c-
off, that we have been making significant gains in this area, we just aren't seeing them yet because it's a 3-year.
We have been making gains. I can't say significant in every grade level and every content area, but again, so the colors are going to show you where we're performing or where our strengths are greater. So for example, if you look at English language arts for grade 8, right? So they are moving, or based on prior test performance, our kids are doing better than would be expected.
So that was last year's 8th graders who are now 9th graders.
Correct.
Okay.
And so again, from a language perspective, I can't say significant improvement because then we can look at grade 4 mathematics and we see still red, still work to be done. My colleagues are going to be joining me shortly, but they're going to give you a teaser or an overview of, again, what we're doing to address that. So we have, she's not new because she's been with the district for quite some time. We have a new program specialist in the area of mathematics, and we are working to review and revise our math curriculum to make sure that teachers have a better understanding of what to focus on, and then looking at our unit tests to better understand what questions to ask, right? So what do kids need to show in order to do in order to demonstrate that they are meeting the grade level standard?
and then haven't there also been some discussions about changing which courses are tested?
Oh, of course.
I know that that's happening at the high school level. There's at least talk, and it's still sort of
So
unknown.
we're confirmed based on House Bill, I believe the number is 166, so the budget bill that I believe it officially goes into effect next week, does change the testing criteria or testing requirements and the graduation requirements beginning with the class of 2023, who are our current 9th graders. What we have not received is an update, so what that means from an accountability standpoint for schools and districts. So I'll try to give you the short version of it. Currently, students in we'll take this cohort, the 2020 cohort, so the ones who are graduating in June, have to earn a minimum number of points across 7 different end-of-course exams. Class of 2023, if they go the testing route, because there are new pathways for graduation, have to demonstrate proficiency on the Algebra 1 test and the English 2 test. English 1 has been eliminated, so it's my understanding, although I haven't received confirmation, that it will not be included in our accountability measures, or we won't see English 1 on our state report card for 2020, but we haven't received any information to date about what the other end-of-course tests will look like in terms of accountability.
And it could also mean those tests count more if English 1 comes out. Potentially. Hopefully not.
It's hard to say. It's like it's at this point, when we think about how they're used, it wouldn't change our achievement component other than reducing the number of indicators. When we think about gap closing, currently, for the high school, only math and English language arts tests are included. Now, what it will impact, or I'm not sure how they're going to address it, but it could impact when we look at performance and points earned from the previous year to the current year. Like, they'll have to recalculate that, so I don't know what that would look like.
It's also really important to point out, too, that, so you've got, from a student's perspective, English 1 and algebra, whatever the math test was. Those are the tests that count for the student. Those are the tests that can earn the student points towards graduation. So now we're asking a student to come into the 10th grade modern American history and, of course, exam, and the student has absolutely no skin in the game.
It's not even the SAT or an ACT.
Correct. However, we are still judging the competency of the teacher based on that.
And the school, so we
And the
see
school,
that
exactly.
reflected when you look
And
at
so-
our performance, our trend data
Right.
for the achievement component in 15, 16, 17, it was not high stakes for students, yet the information was still reported.
And so, we're building a house of cards. We're pretending that these measures are valid measures of a teacher's ability in the classroom. And these things matter. I mean, you're talking about people's jobs, their mortgages, their marriages, their satisfaction in what they do for 30 years that are being measured by 15-year-olds for whom this test is literally standing between them and a Big Mac. It is a nightmare, and we wonder why fewer and fewer college students are becoming teachers, and why we're having trouble drawing. I mean, we've been very fortunate that we are still getting great teachers, but it is harder and harder and harder, for instance, for us to find teachers of color. It is very hard. Schools of education are having a really hard time drawing students of color into the education program, which makes, it harder and harder for us to find teachers of color to put into our classrooms. And teacher shortage overall. So it's really just that sort of thing where we're relying on absurd measures of a teacher's performance. Okay, soapbox off.
And those are real challenges, and those are things that we experience and that we are working through. Final component, graduation rate. So again, just like the Prepared for Success measure, this looks at when we see the 4-year rate on the 2019 report card, we're talking about the class of 2018. And for the 5-year rate, we're talking about the class of 2017. And then you can see the breakdown for the weighting for the 4-year and the 5-year cohorts.
So I'm looking at the ODE website while you talk, because I'm a nerd. And,
But you're our nerd.
yeah. So the 5-year graduation rate is weighted less, but the grade key skips up for letter grades. So the percentage graduation rate you need goes up on the 5-year from the 4-year, but it's weighted less. Again, back to the damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of
So the
approach to math
scaling
here.
is,
Yeah,
right, I don't remember it offhand, but like to help people who can't see, I believe in order to earn an A, the
It's
range is
93% on the 4-year, but it's 95% on the 5-year graduation rate in order to earn an A. But it's only weighted at 40%, so that's,
So what yes, harder to achieve, and then even
And then less valuable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Less impactful. We can see the breakdown of performance across the first ring districts. Our 5-year trend. It is important to note, and I apologize, I cannot remember exactly when, but at some point in this 5 years, the department changed the calculation, and we went from just total number of students in the grade level to using a cohort calculation. So again, I don't remember exactly where that happened. I would probably be safe to assume that that happened, and we switched from,
2015, when
Right.
you got a drop going, then, yeah.
but yes. And then, again, my team, Sharon Roller.
That's the prediction of
That
where we
is the
sit.
projected performance. We are reporting, I think the window closes
good.
next week. So 4-year rate is at 89.6, and, Malia, to your point, just like you, it's harder for the 5-year cohort and less of an impact. There is no rounding up. So it's 89.6 is not 90%, although, that's
That was
how.
third grade that we learned about rounding, wasn't it?
That's how I will refer to it. But it is great to see, again, when we think, and my colleagues are going to be coming up to join me to talk
our
about
trends are looking nice.
process and what it looks like from a systems perspective. But, any organizational change takes time, and we can see that over time, we've had a focus through our strategic plan on our graduation rate, and you can see how we've dedicated resources to that and how that value has changed. And Dan, without any funny business, we've seen that, like that uptick, so shows we are progressing. Well, now I'll have Mr. Swagger and Mrs. Gould come join me at the table. I'll drive the presentation, and they
Same number, yeah,
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Now the fun begins. So Allison has painted a very thorough picture of what has taken place within the report card, and looking at going a little bit deeper. As part of the work that has happened with the Ed Services team is looking at that systemic approach and how to support moving moving us forward so that we do impact achievement. So if we think about the 6 stages for systemic change, there's a maintenance phase where you just keep the status quo. There's an awareness phase of that you look at what you know is happening is not working. There's an exploration phase where you start to look at trying new things. And then there's a transition phase where you look at committing to something new. And then there's an emergence of new infrastructure that will happen once you look at the transition of something, and then there's the predominance of a new system actually taking place. So when I think about 2015 and all of the changes that are happening with the report card, the one thing that was consistent for our district is that we had an implementation of the strategic plan. So we saw that there was something that we needed to do differently, so the strategic plan implementation started in 2015. When you think about 2015, where we were with schools then, that is when we found out that we had schools that were in academic watch, we had focus schools, we had schools at every level, and we had, and it was new to us at that time. So when you're thinking about the systemic approach and the support, there's several levels that you can look at. You can look at vision, you can look at public and political support, networking, teaching and learning changes, administrative roles and responsibility, and policy alignment. What we're looking at here for the Ed Services team is how do we implement a systemic approach so that teachers can do what they need to, students can gain what they need to gain, and leaders can lead like they need to in order to impact achievement. So we started with the building level action plan. In 2016, it was a coherent plan that was not in place. There was no plan about direction of where buildings needed to go and what they needed to focus in and what they needed to do. and to have that collaborative conversation and an infrastructure that was actually set up. So that plan really came into play in 2016. This is also when we started looking at our assessment calendar, and we had an implementation of the district assessments around math and ELA. And then we looked at looking at a new form, and we had 3 goal areas also for our plan. We were focused in on instruction, assessment, and school climate. Those were the 3 focus areas. But the one thing that we needed to do was to look at how we really train those building leadership teams, to have that collaborative conversation, because this was such a new process for our buildings to look at. As we move into 2017, again, we look at the alignment to the district goals that are set out in our plan. We looked at the assessment calendar. We did some changes to the plan, and we also placed it in a Google format to make it more easily for teachers to track what was happening in their teacher-based teams, or professional learning teams as they're sometimes called, around looking at the work that was happening with students. We also began to look at learning walks to see if the curriculum materials that we had in place were actually being used in the classrooms and how they were being used. Also, science assessments came into play. We still had 3 goal areas, but then we introduced site-based budgeting to leaders to look at how they could use their funds in order to support those 3 goal areas that were taking place. Now we're into 2018, no changes again around the plan, pretty much, but then we started talking about we may need to look at combining some of our goal areas and combining instruction and assessment, because they go hand in hand. They're not something that is a singleton. And then we also had social studies assessments that were founded. So here we are in 2019, and what does that building action plan look like to us? The form is still the same. We have not changed the form, because we have found that through the exploration of a new approach that we have now committed to this system. We've also looked at combining those focus areas, and we added the areas of equity and family engagement, because we need to take a look at the goal area of 2 of about how we do our educational approach within our classrooms and for our students. The district then talked about we need to look at focusing our learning walks. Instead of looking at what is happening with our curricular materials, what does it look like for students in the classroom? So the learning walks have now focused in on student engagement in the class. What does that look like between adult implementation and student implementation? What does lesson delivery look like? What do the assessments look like, and how are we doing grouping with those students in the classroom? And how are we also using technology in order to move any of those standards forward as well? Taking a very good listening ear of what has happened over the past 3 years with our assessments. We have looked at the revision of some of our district assessments and very much taken a close look at what has happened with mathematics, because I know that that is an area of concern as we have looked at the data here. And one of the key things that we've done is taught building leaders and building leadership teams to really look at what is the root cause that is causing the impact in student achievement. There is a whole process around looking at finding the why and finding that root cause to really make sure that those goal areas are focused, SMART goals, and those action steps can really get to the achievement that is needed.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
That root cause analysis, are you looking at both achievement increases and lacunae, I guess, or just one?
Are we looking, repeat
At
that?
both, like, places where achievement is getting better, or in places where achievement is not where we want it to be?
It is where we're looking at it getting better.
Okay.
But we have to really buildings have to really understand what is the root cause for their particular building. And we were not sure that buildings really understood their root causes about why they were where they were. Thank you. So just some of the key things again. I used an actual quote from Brene Brown because this is one of the books that we are using with our leaders. But we talked a little bit about targeted learning walks, and I kind of walked through what that looked at. That is a true focus for us. We do learning walks with all of our buildings, elementary, middle, and high school, and even options. And with options, there is a different type of lens that we use because that is an online platform. So we actually have some online things that we look at to see how students are progressing when we do the learning walk there. And any of our credit recovery courses, we use that. For leadership development, as it says there, anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. That's really what we want to do. We want to create leaders, not just at the building level as an administrator, but also those people who are working as building leadership team members, TBT members, and what we call instructional coaches. Instructional coaches are there to support teachers. They are going through a process known as the impact cycle. That is the book that they are focusing on, and it is all about how to coach individuals and adults, because coaching an adult is totally different than working with a child. Go ahead.
Can I ask, how are folks chosen to participate in the BLTs and in those different leadership roles?
The building leadership team is voted on by their colleagues in the building, grade level departments, and they are part of the building leadership team. So instructional coaches, and Bob will go into more detail about some of the work that has happened with the instructional coaches. This year I have the pleasure of working with principals, elementary, middle, and high school. Prior to that, I only had high school and options, so now I have the other lovely administrators. One thing that we started with was looking at what are their strengths. And in order to really build the potential in someone, you have to look at where their strengths are. So we did strength finders, not only with principals, but also with counselors. That was part of the work that came out of our comprehensive counseling plan from last year. So we're building on that this year. And the two books for the principals that we're focusing on is Dare to Lead and looking at teacher evaluations so that we can provide quality feedback to teachers during that evaluation process. Principals and counselors meet monthly with all of them together, and the focus truly this year is, again, them being a true instructional leader, and that means understanding not just what happens in the classroom, but also being able to understand using their data to make sound decisions around that. And the counselors, focusing on them seeing themselves as quality individuals in that process of impacting achievement.
So I wanted to talk just a little bit about how we're trying to strengthen our student academic achievement through the meetings and the structures that we've put in place over the last couple of years. And I really want to think about it as a little bit of an analogy right now. So before we dive in, I want to try and kind of get the idea of like, how do we build this? And so many of you living in Cleveland Heights understand that old houses have some problems with them, right? So it might be that water comes in the basement. A lot of people will call a waterproofing company and they'll say, here's what we can do. Like, we can do it the right way, we could do it the fast way, or we could do it the cheap way. Usually you can't have all three of those things at the same time. So, some of the really dynamic companies come in and they say, here's the 10-step approach that we are going to guarantee for life, but only if we are able to put these things in place, because we want to guarantee that we remediate it from the outside, that we prevent it from happening on the inside, and really making sure that we can control all of the different characteristics. That's kind of how the approach we've been taking to our curriculum. That when we looked at it 4 years ago, we really were at a point where it was, like an old house, that there was some attention that really needed to be given to our curriculum. Again, we've got amazing teachers in Cleveland Heights University Heights schools doing amazing things with students, and at some point in time, the state had shifted standards. They've shifted what the depth of knowledge might be. They've put in testing requirements. All of this moving, it's like, well, how can we guarantee that our students are going to make the progress we want unless we really back up and do the amazing system of knowing, like, we want to be in control of all of it. We want to make sure that if there's curriculum, we got to look at that. We've got to look at assessments. We've got to look at instructional pedagogy. All of those things have been our systemic plan for the last 4 years. And some of the things that we're doing curriculum-wise, really, it was about what are we teaching? And then it became, when are we teaching it? And then it became, what do we expect the students to learn from the curriculum that we're teaching? And then it becomes, how did students perform, like based on district assessments? What does it look like when we start talking about instructional strategies? All of that really boils into the system that we've been trying to implement. So when we think about some of those long-term gains that you've been able to see through the data, it's because we've been manicuring this really intentional system for the last 3 or 4 years. And we continue to work through that system. So when we think about it, we've got our grade level team meetings, and we've been working through those at the elementary level for the last 4 years. This is our 4th year of implementation. That's where we bring all first grade teachers together. It's been varying for the last couple of years. This year we're going to bring them together 4 times throughout the school year for about an hour and a half to really talk about what are the challenges that a 4th grade teacher might be encountering that's a lot different than trying to think about at your building level. You might be saying, well, what are all of our student achievement problems? So this is really geared towards helping teachers understand what they need to be teaching, what are the best ways to teach it, what do we do if students don't understand it, so how can we provide intervention and enrichment, and where do we see some modifications needed to be made when we think about our curriculum. When we think about the middle school, we began the process of meeting with grade level teachers last year when they were together over at the Wiley campus, and we'll continue that. So this is year 2. So when you think about that whole system of what is the curriculum, what is the pacing, what does it look like, how do we make sure that we're aligning with our assessments, we're in year 2 of that work with our middle school teachers. And then we think about this new layer, we have added the high school on this year by meeting with the high school department liaisons. So when we think about these grade level team meetings, we know it's really complicated to be able to pull out the 16 teachers that might be in the math department. We're never going to be able to get through that level. But if we can get to their department leader, their liaison, then they can start using some of that teacher-based team time and work through some of the activities and really be a conduit for that clear communication. So it's been a really big important part of our improvement plan is to have access to teachers to talk about curriculum, instruction, and assessment. When you think about the implementation of the district assessments, and I think you heard Allison mention it, I think Felicia made mention to it, and we're really teasing it because it's going to be part of the work of our next data session when we can really dive into this and let people see how has it really come to life between what we had been doing maybe 3 years ago and what are we really working with teachers to create now, when it's not about, well, what's the test? Like, we know what the test is. Now it's about how instructionally do we make sure that our students can accomplish that task. That's a lot different than saying, well, I'm not sure what the item is going to look like on the test, versus now we know what it looks like. How do we replicate those conditions in our classroom, and how do we give kids enough practice so they feel confident in answering that when it comes time to take a state test? So our math work is really about the tighter alignment to expected performance on our state test. It's really about creating those technology-enhanced items that maybe you've heard about when you look at test specifications. But it's really about how can students become more problem solvers and not so much emphasis on students being test takers. So what does it look like to deal with a real live problem set? What does it look like to deal with live data? A prime example, I saw this today in a classroom, is we had fourth grade students working through what would it look like if you were going out of town on a vacation and you had to have a dog sitting service come and care for your dog. And so the idea of being able to set that up like an equation, being able to predict what the cost is going to be, being able to make a choice about what services are going to be most beneficial to you and your family is really that problem solving that we want our students to be engaged with. And we think that all of that comes on the back of having consistent curriculum, having grade levels come together and talk about what instruction looks like, and analyzing assessment results so our students can be proficient. So that's really some of the highlights that we're talking about when we work through the curriculum, instruction, and assessment component of our plan, all leading back to that systemic approach here in Cleveland Heights University Heights City Schools.
So the next data session, work session that we have, we're going to go deeper into this work. So we can do some hands-on work in terms of understanding the district work here as well. And then, there'll be additional information that we'll share around some of the work we're doing to continue to move achievement. And a lot of the things actually in my own goals, you'll see as a part of that work too. So things like, assessing, continue to assess the curriculum to see where we are with that. Additional data cycles and work with principals around the unit assessment performance and the response to that data, in time throughout the school year as well. I think in the meantime, though, as we get ready for that session, if there are questions you can think of now, and this is not the only time to ask those questions, just so you know, but if there are some things that you would really want to hear when we do the work session with the Ed Services team, especially now that we've had a more comprehensive session around the data. You've heard some of the initial plans of the team around that work, some things that you would really want to know more about for that work session that's coming up. Anything that comes to mind?
For me, it's just I'd like to know the numbers for those on track, and yeah, that's.
And I know we've given you guys a lot to digest tonight.
This is great.
There's a lot here to
So,
read, a lot
As
of
you
detailed
go back and
reports.
revisit, that'll be in November. We'll continue to build that out. I do want to acknowledge that Bob's team, the program specialists, are in the room. So thank you guys for coming. I know you have a PD early tomorrow morning as well, in addition to some of our staff from Specialized Services, gifted as well here. So but I really appreciate the collaborative effort in this work and everyone's kind of growing understanding. I really think Felicia raises a good point in terms of the cycles of change and how it takes a while to really kind of get some things institutionalized in the system. And then now I think we're at the point where we can now refine some of the work that we've done. And in the briefing that Allison and I had today, again, I'm very sorry to have to do a briefing in this on the same night, but I talked about some of the national work in this area, and because the district is already has some of the key pieces in place, we can now really engage with some national partners and research around our current structures, because we have the structures to do that kind of work too as well. The last thing I'll say, I have so much to say about the report card, but the last thing that I'll say is it's so interesting to, to understand kind of the communication on a district getting a grade versus a school getting a grade, and how this is still a relatively new phenomenon. I thought that this district grade stuff had been going on for 5-10 years. This is the third year.
No.
And so I also think that we're kind of like, now that the tests are consistent, now we kind of have an understanding of our areas to work on. We're even better positioned to continue to grow in some of the work as well. So, and even as it relates to, when I look at the work of, so we've been looking at how do we build on the work of the counseling department so that we can better access, college outcomes. The state doesn't measure college.
Right.
The state measures graduation. And so you can see the focus of the school on what's measured because of the pressure, which is why the measurements that matter piece back to my goals is really important, because I think we want to make it a statement as a community what's important to us for our kids, and not allow the state to make that determination. And now I'm feeling like I'm getting on a soapbox, which I never do, but I just want to say, I do want to say that as it
I'm up.
relates to that,
The
because
view's
I think that's a big gap in terms of the state setting a standard that doesn't really speak to what we know is really best for kids too. You know, like, I actually want to push the state to go higher in their expectations on some things. So anyway, so more to come on the data session. I want to thank the team so much for your work around a million other things. Literally yesterday, Felicia had 3 trainings going at the same time over at the Delisle Center. So the team is doing really hard and really important work, and I just thank you guys for your continued commitment. Early mornings, late nights, weekends. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was a great session. I'm sure I will have additional questions once I have time to really dig deep and read this, and I think you know this board well enough to know that we all really will read deep and come back with questions. I know that the document that's currently in board docs was not, there was some tweaks to it from what you showed, so if you guys can just make sure that gets updated
the
in
most
board
accurate
docs.
one
Yeah,
goes
get the
up.
most,
Yeah.
the most recent one
Yours is
up in board docs. And then this is a reminder to the board, when they mentioned the strength finders that
Yeah.
they're doing, we all are taking that as well.
Oh, I have to remember what I did with it.
So if you need yours, I'm sure Rosalind probably still has the information.
No,
can
no, I
send it
did
to
the
you.
thing, it's like, what did I do with the report?
Okay, good.
It's
Because we
somewhere on the
will,
hard
at,
disk.
I need everybody to do that before our next retreat, which will be in January, I think around the 25th or something like that, because I would like to do something with that data. I mean, our staff's doing it. I think it's really useful. I've done it in my day job and have found it to be tremendously useful, what I've learned about myself and working with others, and I just think it's a great thing that we're doing it.
Yeah.
Glad to see the staff's doing it, glad to see we're doing it.
Booted off halfway through, so I have to finish it.
But thank you. I know a lot of work goes into putting together a presentation like this and just understanding what's here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
No.
Then do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll?
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Ms. Serene.
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
Ms. Wright.
Good night, everyone. We're adjourned.